Welcome to Implicating the Real. My name is Michael. I'm joined as always by my good friend Joe. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. This is a short one.
Good. And we're joined by our friend Liana. Liana, how are you?
Good.
Welcome, guys. Glad you're here. So we're finishing up, hopefully, Chapter 8 of Seth Speaks, and this is session 534, and it's not necessarily a typical session. What did you guys think?
I mean, my notes for this says Rob has a stroke.
That's a good way to get into it. There's a lot of parentheticals and there's a lot of behind the scenes things happening and a bit of actual session stuff happening. So previously we talked a lot about the benefits of an alternate sleep schedule, et cetera, et cetera. And I think behind the scenes in that material was like the nature of consciousness isn't the way we think it is, and therefore we should treat it differently, sleep differently. And now he's tying that difference in the nature of consciousness into consciousness itself, and then he's going to transition to like death and afterlife states and stuff like that.
Did you guys understand what Seth was talking about during the whole thing?
In this session?
Yeah.
There's some points where I would like more information, but I think I'm kind of following along.
I guess to me, there was like a shift where it was so much parentheticals that like the parenthetical became the like real story, and then whatever Seth was interluding, like just inserting, became sort of just like a weird background. Like it's very, like reading it is very like literary actually, where it's like it has this sort of like fun quality to it of like Rob's like stream of consciousness, and then it gets interrupted by the thing that he's supposed to be focusing on.
Yeah, like there's the thought and the action happening at the same time kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's like, it's Seth, so
yeah,
whenever he like interrupts with a sentence about like the nature of consciousness and stuff, it's like very out there. And then you're like having Rob with this like internal conundrum, and it's like, my man, I'm like not able to process the whole like nature of being and consciousness and focus and all that stuff. It's like right now my like vision is getting messed up, you know, like.
I like to think that Seth knew that was going on and was aware that Rob wasn't able to take accurate notes at the time, but just continued for illustration. Because at the end, he does say, like, as Rob so very well showed us, like, you know, this is a living example of the material I'm teaching you.
Yeah, he implies that he knew, and he always uses the term Joseph, or almost always, but this is the one time where I feel like he means it explicitly. The Joseph entity level of Rob decided to give this example. Does anyone have a good explanation of what's going on here so our listeners aren't so lost? Like it's supposed to be a normal session as far as Jane and Rob know, but they both kind of start experiencing weird things.
Yeah, it starts with the painting, right?
Jane perceives the painting smiling at her, the painting of the entity Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
So she's having her own independent experience and isn't too weirded out by it, I guess.
And then what happens is that Jane goes into trance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Rob, right at the beginning of the session, is starting to have these like interferences with his vision.
He like sees like some light. He describes it as a smallish, bright, sawtooth pattern of light.
And apparently this has happened like his whole life.
Yeah.
Where he just like will get these episodes of like partial like blindness or something, where there's just like some kind of thing impeding his ability to like see part of his field of vision.
And he kind of explains that he's never told anyone, but was never too freaked out about it. They just kind of pass in less than a half an hour.
Yeah, which seems like pretty normal, right? Like I feel like there's people who have like micro seizures and stuff like that, who they're just like, I don't know, that just like happens.
Yeah, like weird things happen with your body every once in a while. You'll have a weird sensation, and I just remember feeling like, oh shit, is something wrong with me? And then like it just always passes and whatever.
Yeah, so he's like, this is pretty normal for him. And he's like, I'm just going to keep running the session. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to keep like writing the dictation, right?
But then that becomes a problem. He has a lot of trouble spelling, basically.
Yeah, and that's the part where I started being like, okay, this dude's just having a stroke. Because he keeps like mixing up his like letters. Like he's writing them in the wrong order, and he's writing like, he says he's like keeps needing to ask Seth to like slow down, even though Seth is already talking really slow, he like just can't like process the words at all.
I'm curious about his reluctance just to even bring this up in the moment to Seth.
Yeah.
Like he just kind of like tries to let it, I mean, I guess it's the same instinct, like, oh, no big deal, this will pass, I don't want to alarm other people. I'm trying to think, like, what would a stroke be in Seth's definition, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So he talks, like, some of the material he is getting through before it kind of breaks down here. Consciousness is never, like, fully out. It just, like, dims. Consciousness does not refresh itself in sleep. It is merely turned in another direction. Conscious does not sleep then in those terms, and while it may be turned off, it is not like a light. Turning it off does not extinguish it in the way that a light disappears when a switch is turned. Following the analogy, if consciousness were like a light that belonged to you, even when you switched it off, there would be a sort of twilight, but not darkness. So he talks about a twilight or a dimming of consciousness. And he later says that Joseph gave us a demonstration of this dimming.
I figured that was why Rob didn't actually call for the session to pause.
Because at the entity level, it was like totally on board with it. And
Yeah.
was doing it purposefully.
Yeah. And because he wasn't thinking straight enough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's major impairment, I would think.
And then I saw there was this interesting part where Rob writes, "This may be a tricky point, and it may not. Seth used the word dimming. Certainly some of my abilities for physical expression had withdrawn considerably, yet I had remained clear-headed and alert, and out of habit thoroughly occupied with trying to use them. Nor had I become aware of any kind of heightened consciousness or sudden telepathic or clairvoyant powers." So my read on it was sort of the skeptical one of like, well, that's how you account for the weird thing happening during your session, is you go like, oh, don't worry, this was all preordained. This was actually a test. This was a lesson that I'm teaching you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that Rob had this weird event happen and I'm sort of rambling about consciousness. It's actually that this was all a demonstration of what I'm trying to say. Because like I feel like there's a little bit of a mismatch between like what's happening to Rob and what's being talked about in the session.
Yeah. My take was that, I wanted the example to be like more powerful than just like dimming, but he's kind of suggesting that like that is the part that we need to overcome, is that our beliefs won't allow our conscious selves to accept certain realities. So a lot of the material he is getting through, he's kind of like pointing to that our consciousness is elsewhere sometimes, or it has these other abilities that are definition of what's real. And he uses the term just like connecting to the body, like a consciousness connected to the body. That part doesn't accept certain things. And it seems like the Rob part of the Joseph entity is still not yet in the place where he can have this expansive experience. And maybe there is a probability where Rob has this big breakthrough in this session and he's like, oh, and then I experience the dimming and then I experience the expansive part. But it doesn't seem to happen in this one.
Yeah.
From your skeptical point of view, that may be like an overly sympathetic point of view. But that's kind of how I was taking it to mean.
Yeah, I guess I was just so enthralled with the parentheticals, with the italics, because it's like Rob's a pretty good writer, I feel like when he's writing like from his like conscious like experience, you like feel very sympathetic for like his sort of like difficult situation.
Yeah.
Of like, it's so difficult to even like as a reader like focus on what Seth is saying, because it seems so like unimportant.
Yeah, I had to go back and just read it without the parentheticals.
Right.
Because I felt like there was so much going on behind the scenes that it was distracting me from what Seth was saying. So that's kind of an overview of the whole background. Should we just dip into a little bit of the material? Do you guys got anything highlighted, or do you want to talk about? The beginning right here. Consciousness has many characteristics. Some, of course, known to you. Many of the characteristics of consciousness, however, are not so apparent, since presently you largely use your own consciousness in such a way that its perceptions appear in quite other than natural guises. You are aware of your own consciousness, in other words, through the medium of your own physical mechanism. I like that term. You are not nearly as aware of your own consciousness when it is not operating primarily through the mediumship of the body, as it does in out-of-body states in some disassociated conditions. So that's kind of what he's getting at. This is the part that always confuses me when he like makes this distinction between spirit and consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But he's kind of saying that, I read a little bit that consciousness doesn't sleep in those terms, he says, but it's just turned in a different direction. And so that's kind of what I was saying about the Rob experience, is that like his consciousness is elsewhere and he's cut himself off from experiencing what his consciousness is currently doing at that time.
Say that again? So his consciousness is somewhere else.
So Seth says that Joseph has given this example of consciousness dimming,
Yeah.
but he's implying that the dimming is just consciousness turned into another direction.
Got you.
It's just dimming from this narrow perspective of physical life.
Right. Because like by definition, if it's a consciousness, you're conscious of it, right?
Yeah, and Seth says that here and there about like dementia and like old age stuff like that, the consciousness of that person is just tuning into something else.
Right. But that makes sense like from the outside perspective of a dementia patient, because you can say like, oh, you're just conscious of something else from what's going on right now. But Rob's saying from his internal experience, he's not conscious of that, right? He's conscious of this.
Yeah.
Like that's the point he's making, is like, but I wasn't conscious of this other thing. I was conscious of being right here and trying to write. Like that's what I was conscious of, you know?
But then Seth says that Joseph was not aware consciously of giving permission for this demonstration, because if he were, he would automatically be frightened and it wouldn't work out the way it did.
Right.
Like he wouldn't allow it to happen.
Yeah.
But then does that mean that the demonstration isn't like a different focus of his consciousness? It's like something else, because his consciousness is still conscious of this, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying like we're getting the Rob point of view, which is the limited point of view. You know, like I think the dementia example is very similar, because there's a part of that person they have this experience and then they have this experience, and sometimes they're cut off one from the other. Do you know what I mean? When their like focus is elsewhere, they're not that focused around here. Their consciousness here is dimmed, as Rob's was.
Right. There's not like a unity of consciousness.
But I think that's it. It transitions really well, because I think he's moving us from talking about sleep, which is also a conversation about consciousness, into this, and then the next chapter is going to be about death and after death,
right,
or afterlife.
Yeah, and we see Rob sort of on the precipice of life and death for a moment.
Well, he's kind of saying that like it would be helpful if you practice with this consciousness mobility before you got there. Mm-hmm. It would be less of a traumatic experience. It doesn't need to be that painful or impactful, like if you understand what's happening. And to me, it's amazing, and it makes sense when you think about it, but like how much our beliefs like will affect your experience. Like you can see, like if you believe that your consciousness will be extinguished with the body, it's a terrible, frightening thing to even know about. You know, like there's been a lot of philosophers that like that is like the distinguishing thing between humans and animals, right? We know we're going to die.
Right.
And it's thought of almost as a curse by some people.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to get into the death thing, I guess?
I mean, if you got something, I mean, we'll get into it very deeply, I think, in the next chapter, but we don't have to wait.
I know we were talking about how there's like 3 chapters about death coming up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Some could say it's like one of the most foundational experiences like of human life, you know?
Death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's that classic, thing about, I forget which, university it was or whatever, but like their gate when you go in just says like memento mori, like right on it.
Huh.
Because that's like taken as being like fundamental to like being like an actualized like person, or like being like like an active person who's like doing things in the world, is like understanding that's like, no, you're going to die. You need to like get this shit done, like,
yeah,
you can't escape from it. You can't hide from it. You have to accept it.
I know that's a pretty important quote in Stoicism as a reminder that like, death is imminent. Don't wait around.
Yeah. Isn't there like one Stoic author talks about like you should sit down every day and imagine your children dying? so that you're ready for the eventuality of it.
That's quite the prescription.
Yeah.
I like, like confronting death, but I also want to stress that I think it's important that you be aware of what beliefs you're bringing to what you think death is. Like, I think that's where a lot of people that do spend a lot of time thinking about this can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, if you're certain death is, like, we don't really know in the way we like to think we know what's going to happen. Like, there's belief systems, but like, I'm just saying, let's acknowledge where there's assumption and belief happening, and don't let that play in too heavily when in our, ruminations on death. I have a tattoo that says "Today's a good day to die,"
Mm-hmm.
that I got, like at 19 or something.
For the viewer listening at home, Michael just lifted up his shirt and showed off his midriff.
You tune in for the video podcast,
Right?
Maybe someday. But like in a lot of things that I've been attracted to, a lot of philosophies, you just don't get through it without talking about death, because it defines, what reality is in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Was it last time we were talking about, and you were like, I don't think it would be so bad to live forever.
I still don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think anyone who's afraid of living forever just has a lack of imagination.
But I think where we got to is that, like, we got to keep in mind forever is a really, really long time. And I think the alternative isn't necessarily not living forever. It's living forever in different bodies and worlds and times.
Then it's a false question to begin with. If your two options are live forever or live forever, it's not really a question, is it?
Right, but I'm not too worried about like asking the former question. I'm worried about like figuring out like what's actually happening, what's real.
What do you think about this hypothetical then? Your options are live forever as a human being, like right now, or death is the cessation of experience and you're permanently dead.
Do I get to off myself if it gets real bad?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's easy then.
When I say immortal life, I mean you just don't have a time limit. You can live for as long as you want to. And then the human experience is preempted by the fact that you can always off yourself whenever you want. Listener, you can always off yourself whenever you want. That is within your power.
I think
Never
that's
forget.
easy then. I think, you choose immortality, or like there's like an asterisk by that immortality, right? If you can off yourself.
Well, it's not forced immortality,
Right.
if it were forced immortality, though, would you still want that, Joe? Because that sounds horrible.
Yeah, no, that does sound horrible because like that takes away a fundamental aspect of what it is to be human, I think there's a lot of existentialist thought based off of the fact that like the freedom to kill yourself is the most fundamental freedom that exists. And like so much other things derive from that. So it's like if you're denying yourself that freedom, you're denying yourself a lot of other freedoms as a human being.
So would you call that free will?
Well, what do you mean? Like what part of it is the will?
Well, if you get to choose if and when you die, that's, to me, it's free will. I think we've had versions of this conversation maybe on air before, but
Yeah.
like I always try to distinguish free will from like absolute power. Like I don't care for the argument like, well, if I had free will, why can't I fly?
I just feel like, yeah, to me, like the idea of free will is just like such a muddied concept that like when people ask me like, do you believe in free will? I like don't know what they're asking.
Yeah.
Like I think it's difficult for them to say what they're asking,
But in the same way that you just said, like, what did you say? Death is like the ultimate
like freedom,
like
the choice of dying.
Yeah.
Because it's like no matter what, like everything you experience in the world is predicated on you being around to experience it.
Right.
And it is within your physical capacity. Most of us, some people maybe not, but for most of us, it is within our physical capacity to very quickly just decide we want to turn it off,
Mm-hmm.
And that's just an always present option.
It's interesting to think, like, I never really spent a lot of time thinking about how that is probably a comfort at some level, but it is, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, because it would be a different sort of horror if you knew that you couldn't die.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of us would be living this crazy, like, OCD, like, safe as possible kind of life, probably.
Well, and you see it in extreme circumstances. Like, people will make the very rational choice to be like, this suffering is not worth it,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like it's unheard of just in a normal human experience to be like, there is a maximum amount of pain that is tolerable.
At the same time, like our medical model often like tries to prolong life as much as possible at any cost. And despite the suffering, like we just don't let people die.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know if it's like heroicism or where it comes from that we have to try to like save, even the oldest and sickest person.
I wonder if, because like that was the thing I had just said, right? Like it's usually within your capacity, but when you are older, there might be a lot more things that prevent you from being able to take the initiative into your own hands, So like maybe it feels more like a thing that you can sort of force on other people. And there's sort of a social pressure to do so,
Yeah, I think it's becoming more popular to people to have their paperwork in order before they get to a certain point, right?
Listener, make sure you make pre-death plans. Write a will, please. Don't leave it up to your loved ones. They do not want that responsibility.
DNR, DNI.
You need a healthcare director because the will won't cover that. But
That's true, yeah.
Do not resuscitate. You need to spell out your wishes really clearly. You need to make sure your next of kin isn't going to fuck you.
That they can't like change your mind and like keep you in a coma for 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or kill you when you actually want to.
So then, you probably have to be very explicit and very legal about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're further down the tangent, but like even doctors, like most doctors are people that have seen CPR. Have we talked about this? They choose, no, I don't want any of that. Because like ribs are getting broken and it just doesn't work 90% of the time. And
yeah, your brain function's like probably not going to be there.
It's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah.
On that note, I don't know.
But like, okay, this idea of like flickering in and out, right? I know, and I read a little bit of the next chapter. Seth talks about the metaphor of like your consciousness is like a firefly.
Oh, with the glow.
Yeah.
The consciousness. Yeah.
And it's like you're flickering in and out. Like, at what level are we talking here? Is this like your conscious experience of being alive? Is it just like the point that, well, technically, if you think about it quantum mechanically, we're always flicking in and out of existence? Like, what level are we talking about?
I think both. Like, I feel like that's like a question of like frequency or almost.
You're right, exactly. You're like, what frequency are we talking? Because like, if it's the quantum frequency, then this experience that Rob has, like, that's not that, right? That's a different thing.
Yeah, I don't know. But it makes me want to comment on like what we had just read earlier in the chapter, which seemed to be all about these sleep patterns, but it was about like how consciousness, it seems like conscious needs this fluctuation, but it's actually just the cells of the body, I think, need it because it's this weird kind of physical correlate to consciousness. So there's like a chemical buildup, and therefore this sort of fluctuation or dimming is a natural part of being physical. I don't know how that works in like a non-physical way, but I think he's kind of implying that consciousness doesn't need sleep. He said in those terms, and I don't know what that means specifically. I don't know if that answers your question.
Because like, what's happening to Rob then?
I mean, according to the text, his consciousness retreats and goes elsewhere. I think on his entity level, his consciousness just chose to pay attention to something else, which happens all the time. Like, when you're driving and you're spacing out and you don't even remember details about the drive there. As for what you were saying about the flickering on and off, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like for quantum physics, the flickering is more of a binary state. You're here or you're not. But I think, at least my understanding of Seth's like firefly, I wouldn't pick that analogy personally. The way I see it is, it's more of like a lighthouse. If you're standing a distance from a lighthouse, eventually the spinning light will hit you, and it'll look like the lighthouse is on. It is always on. And the circle that it spins in can be divided infinitely into like infinitesimally small angles.
Right.
I think that because Seth says we live all lives simultaneously, and yet we are conscious in each one, and we are also conscious on an entity level, because entity is still technically us.
Yeah.
That we're flickering our consciousness through all of our simultaneous lives and on the entity level. And we get like one moment each, I don't know what you would call that, Planck's constant, each frequency.
Why do you think why do you think consciousness can't simultaneously be both? Or I guess, if the entity is outside of time, why does it need to flip back and forth?
I think it is both for the entity.
Yeah, I think the entity is aware of itself and of each life. But Seth has also said that if you were consciously aware of everything that were going on, all your lives, and everything that you potentially have the capacity to tap into with your awareness, you will be completely flooded. Like, hasn't he described the ego as essentially like a filtering mechanism so that you're just not overwhelmed by way too much data to process?
Maybe, but I think there's also another reason is like there's something new that comes from the limitation.
Yeah.
We've touched on this before, but like that's getting into like the creative dilemmas and stuff. But like by taking on this technically impossible experience of believing we're completely independent entity, like that we're not part of a higher consciousness, we have all these new experiences that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Because you're focusing down on something specific. So, like, I'm probably the worst person to talk about anything athletic, but this is at least my understanding of like sports. If you were trying to perfect like your tennis swing, you would take yourself out of a competitive game and just have a bucket of tennis balls there and just keep like focusing on having the right form in that moment. Because then when you actually get focused on that perfecting that specific movement, you find like, oh, there might be some specific challenges. Maybe like moving your wrist this way is uncomfortable or hurts, or maybe like your equipment isn't functioning with you very well in that regard. And only by focusing on that specific movement can you perfect it. So when entities come down into human form, they're picking up like a very specific set of conditions and challenges so that they can hone some ability of theirs really well in this life, or learn like very niche lessons that they couldn't learn if they remember, oh, hey, I'm an eternal consciousness that can't be snuffed out. Like, the stakes are just not there.
So is the limited periodicity of the consciousness one of the challenges? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it's one of the challenges, because Seth has said that we can have that expanded awareness if we train for it, but that most of us, because of the beliefs that all the societies and cultures of the world instill in us, that we think that we are just human. And we think that we can only perceive what is physically in front of us that can be measured, as opposed to like other... He has said that we are supposed to be able to recall all of our dreams, and he has said that we do have the capacity to tap into our simultaneous reincarnational lives if we want, and that we can tap into our awareness of our greater entity and basically just get fed information from Framework 2. But we don't, because we're told that like, oh, don't listen to your intuition. That's not intellectual. Like, that's boo-boo stuff. Don't do that.
Okay, so the idea is like the Joseph entity isn't flicking in and out of Rob. It's like constant, and it's like Rob's the one who can't like
I believe so.
experience it all.
Yeah, because he has said before that your entity is aware of everything, even a hair falling from your head.
Yeah, and I think I like to think of it as, to that extent, we are our entity's consciousness. There's like zero distinction. It's not like we're like a separation that we're gonna like return it to the entity. We're like literally this portions of the entity's consciousness.
But then how could the entity be conscious of what's going on with Joseph and Rob? How could Joseph be conscious of what's happening to Rob, but Rob not be conscious of it then, if he's the portion of the consciousness, right?
For the same reason the rest of us aren't aware of our entity.
You know, Rob's just a pear and the entity is the whole tree. You know, the tree is aware of its whole self and Rob's just aware of his portion of self.
Right, but you were just saying they're the same thing.
Well, I'm saying my consciousness isn't like something separate that I bring back to the entity at the end of my life or something. Like the entity is my consciousness right now. Like every part of me is part of the entity. Not every part of the entity is part of me.
Sure. So your experience, or the entity's experience of your life, is downstream of your experience of it. Like you're the medium by which it, like if you were a camera feed, like the visual information is going in through your lens and then it's getting piped to the larger system that is the entity.
Well, I guess the distinction I'm trying to make is that like there's no piping, there's no like it just is.
But I guess my point
there's
is, like,
no like me and it in the sense like I am part of it.
Well, that's the thing though, is like separation implies parts, right? Like the idea is like, if we're saying there's a separation between the well of information that Joseph has and the well of information that Rob has access to, then that implies that there is some separation happening, you know?
The separation, it's just a limitation on my part.
Sure, but separation and limitation are the same thing, right? Conceptually. Like, if I've, like, listener, imagine a puzzle piece, like the classic puzzle piece with, like, little divots and little, like, knobs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's one thing to say the whole puzzle piece it's all just one piece, right? The whole puzzle piece is all just one piece. But, like, the knob is clearly separate from other parts of the puzzle piece. Like, it's not the case that the entire thing is circular. There is topography. And, like, the topography requires some level of differentiation to exist.
It's distinguishable, like, verbally, but, like, at some level it's not, right? Like, I feel like that is the tricky part of, like, getting into this and either, like higher concepts of, like, Taoism or any other, like those explicit laws of distinction don't necessarily function. That's why koans are, like,
right,
a thing.
But I think that, like, what those things lead you to is the next step of realizing. So first you realize that there is both separation and non-separation between different parts of a larger system. But then the next step is to say, all right, well, let's explain what the mechanics of that larger system are and how these parts become part of a whole, right? So that's, like, the part that's needed is the explanation of, like, well, here's how this part and this other part interact together. And once you have that information, separateness or non-separateness becomes a non-issue because you've given a better description by saying this is how the part and the whole relate to one another. You know what I'm saying?
But I think they do.
I don't know if I am. I'm still, I don't feel like there's very much of a logical contradiction. They're, like, saying, like, the limitation is on my side of things.
I'm not saying there's a contradiction. I'm just saying that, like, the implications of everything that we've just talked about is that there is still a further explanation required before the thing we're talking about makes sense.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked your analogy of the lighthouse because that made me think of frame rate in, like, a film.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can think of, like, if you're in a totally pitch black area and the lighthouse is just spinning and you have just this narrow slice of view of this 360 degrees. If it's spinning fast enough, this is why I said I think it's a matter of frequency. That's going to align with your consciousness and you're going to fall into this perception that this is total reality. Like, it's going to seem continuous in the way that we watch a film and there's 30 frames per second or whatever. It seems continuous, but it's not. It's just one subtly different image after another. And in that sense, you can see how, like, this consciousness that never actually dims, but, like, if our frequency gets off a little bit, then our experience of that slice of consciousness dims, whereas the light never actually dims.
So in this metaphor, the person watching the lighthouse is you, the human being, and the light from the lighthouse is the entity.
I think so. Or
that's how I understand.
Seth is making the distinction, and I still don't understand this totally, but between the spirit and consciousness. And I think that's where he was using the firefly, maybe, that the firefly is the spirit that never goes away, even though it can turn its consciousness on and off to varying degrees. I came into this material thinking like everything was kind of consciousness, just at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, he said that earlier in this book, I think, and we got hung up on it. I don't know if it was...
I thought he said everything has consciousness.
Because consciousness is a quality of being, right?
Yeah, it's like an awareness.
Right. I'm just saying, like, my personal view coming into this, like, I'm still struggling trying to square that with... I was under the assumption, like, I'm kind of this pantheist that thinks that everything is consciousness. And I'm trying to understand, what is spirit? What is the other thing without consciousness? Is it will? Is it, like...
Right.
That's kind of what I'm getting to there.
Right, because Seth uses a lot of different, like, similar but not exactly the same terms.
Yeah.
I still get hung up on this timelessness thing, man. Whenever there's a limitation involved, and it's like, but you don't have any time limits. Why would there be a limitation? You don't have a time limit.
What do you mean?
Well, because, like, we started off with the book talking about how, like, entities exist outside of time, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, anytime you try to limit an entity, it seems like fundamentally the entity could just take longer to do the thing that it needs to do and have it still happen or instantaneously, you know?
Take longer, but instantaneously.
Right.
Like,
because
it's hard to even talk about it
because we talk about how like entities need to grow, right? They need to have experience. They need to grow. They need to become like trained and they're students. And it's like, in what dimension is their training happening? It's not temporal, right?
Right.
So in the temporal sense, they would have already always been trained, you know? Like your entity from your experience should be the fully matured version of your entity that has learned all its lessons already.
I think one of the distinctions is that I don't think he explicitly said there is no time. I think he says there's no time relative to our time.
Isn't that the same thing?
I don't think so, because it can still imply like development. This is kind of like a bandwidth question. So like if we take that lighthouse example and I'm just this one person like a mile away looking at this illuminated area as it goes by, like my bandwidth is that. But like there's other reincarnational selves of me or counterparts of myself around this perimeter looking at their view. But the entity can be aware of all these things at the same time. They're still in time, but their bandwidth is bigger. So they're taking in all of our times at the same time. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Like they can experience, the entity, according to Seth, is experiencing many lives at the same time.
Right.
So like in that sense, all those lives are happening at the same time to the entity. But the entity can still be growing and experiencing in its own time. Like you can just like imagine like a Russian or like a nested doll situation where, you know, every entity has its own entity.
So do you think that there's not like, do you think that the order of past lives is like you can interact with lives that have happened before you, but you can't interact with lives that happen after you, and that like there's a sequence?
No, there is no order. You can interact with the you that lives in the year 3000.
Right, but like not our temporal sequence, but like the sequence in which the entity had those lives. Because what Michael's saying is implying that there's a sequencing happening, right? Because Seth says, like, when you get done with your life, you start planning your next one. So it's like, clearly there's an ordering happening.
Right? I think there is another way to interpret it. When you were saying that entities are timeless, yeah, I get what you mean. Entities don't advance in terms of time. I hate the word advance.
Right.
Entities don't progress in terms of time. They also a terrible word choice, but like they progress more after accumulating experiences. They are different after accumulating experiences. So if you think of it in terms of experience accumulation instead of time passage, it becomes different.
But that's what time passage is, right?
I feel like this whole timelessness thing is probably challenging for any human to grasp before they exit. But the way I see it is you are differentiating yourself in as many ways as possible, which are infinite, and that there are multiple versions of each entity, and that you are basically just instead of time passing for them, it's more like a differentiation of infinite possibilities. Because Seth has said that at one point he, Jane, and Rob were the same entity, but now they are not anymore, implying that there is either a splitting of the entity or not a splitting, and it's the same entity in an infinite stack of different probabilities. And then instead of the passage of time, it's just like, oh, okay, well, you lived your life here as a teacher, like your Joe entity lived your life here as a teacher. This now spawns this other probability where the entity may go towards teaching as a different passion, versus if you live your life as, like an accountant, then your entity might, in some other probability, go towards something more mathematically related or something like that.
Right. So like in this sense, what every entity is essentially like a specific location on the topography of, like, if you imagine like a fractal sort of like mathematical image or something like that, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
inside of the mathematical expression, it all exists together at once. Mm-hmm. But then when you extrapolate it out, it becomes topography, right?
Right. Yeah. And like the way, like I know what a fractal would look like, but the way I prefer to view it would be like a tree branching into just more and more infinite probabilities.
Right.
Where that does not require the passage of time, but there is differentiation in The accumulation of experiences.
I always end up on the tree analogy too, but then I think it goes beyond just our symbolic, because it's a tree without space limitations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if that makes any sense. So there's just literally no limitations, because in a tree, the only limitation is this branch can't be here because there's already another branch there.
Right, yeah, because that's like what I'm saying with like this idea of like topography is like the same thing as like with a puzzle piece, where it's like it's infinite but not unlimited, if that makes sense.
Well, I almost said this when you were talking, that I was going to ask you, do you think we've talked about there's like different kinds of infinities? Do you think that would be like an example, what we're trying to understand here?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because this line can be infinite.
Michael's making a line between his fingers.
Yeah. I mean, and all lines can be an infinite, and they're not the same.
Definitionally, right? Yeah.
And they're not the same.
Yeah, because you can put them in a higher dimensional space.
Yeah.
Right? In which, you know, they occupy a non-infinite like point.
Yeah. I think Seth, without giving a great explanation of the contradiction, like addresses the contradiction somewhere when he says like every entity that is or will be already is, but at the same time we can choose to become our own entity. I remember him saying that somewhere and like never getting like a satisfactory explanation.
Well, especially when you bring in, because I know this is a thing you bring up a lot, the idea that like choice should be operational.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that's a very difficult part to square with this like infinite tree thing, right?
What do you mean operational?
Free will is always operational.
That's like a thing Michael
Like
says a lot.
determined?
Free will, no, the opposite of determinism.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Because like if we're thinking about it as like you can have a mathematical expression that creates a fractal, and then the more you look at it, the more it expands itself, but it is a unity before that expansion happens. All the parts of what you would see if you extrapolated it are sort of already determined, right? There's a determinism built into that metaphor.
You brought the fractal thing in as an example. Like the fractal implies that this pattern is expanding, but like I think in Seth's philosophy, like every part of that fractal is choosing its own direction. And there is a part of it that chooses to like express that pattern infinitely and keep growing. But like this is where like we get outside of our limitations of time and space, like every, you know, and we get into the complete fabric of probabilities. Like every part of that fractal is taking its own direction, becoming something new, choosing its own way, but which also among all those infinite probabilities includes just the normal fractal that is sort of more or less predetermined. Does that make sense?
No, because like the determinism is a part of the unity. Like the unity comes from the determinism. If you take away the determinism, it's no longer unified.
Right. Therefore, that part is unified, but the part that splits off is no longer unified in the same way.
We're talking about like unity at like the top level though, right?
Well, I don't know if we have the right to talk about the top level. Do you know what I mean? Like, our intellect reaches only so far. We have to have, or you mean something else?
No. I think the top level is the easiest one to talk about, usually, when you're doing this kind of like sort of metaphysical work, right?
Yeah, but we have to have the humility to know that we can't understand the top level.
I don't know if that's true. Because like, do you think that at base, like the way things work, like have a logical order to them? Like, do you think it's like they follow some sort of like logical way of being understood?
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that we can find a logic because that's the way we understand. But I think when we're just talking about a top level, we're saying I can extrapolate from my limited view of infinity and I can expand that without expecting there to be any flaw along the way. You know, that's kind of silly.
Well, no, I'm just saying that like very basic understandings of how things work should imply some features of the top level. For example, at the top level, everything is like one thing, right? Because if it wasn't, then if it was two things instead of one thing, and this is like, we're using very vague terms, right? Because we're talking about very abstract metaphysical. But if everything that was two things instead of one thing, it wouldn't be everything that was, right? Mm-hmm. Because the things wouldn't be able to interact with one another. So everything that is has to be one thing at the top level,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's a way that you can talk about the top level, just by logically reasoning out, like, it needs to be a unity in some sense.
Right.
You know?
And I'm not disputing that we can talk about it. I'm just saying we have to like carry that humility with us when we're talking about that level.
Right, but I'm just talking about, like, you're talking about, like, oh, well, there's this determinism, but then there's also this probability. And I'm like, well, I don't know if you can say both things at the top.
No, I'm just saying, like, among all the probabilities, one part of it chooses this fractal where it would be perceived as being determined. Do you know what I mean? That's all I'm saying.
Not really.
You know, like a fractal, I mean, that's what you're saying, right? Like a fractal, basically we can predict how it's going to expand, and it's always going to fit this pattern.
Right. Yeah.
That, to me, is a kind of a determinism.
Right.
I'm just saying, like, that determinism doesn't exist in itself. That fractal exists as a choice in a fabric of free will. Like, there's a part of all that is that chooses to be the fractal. And so it therefore technically isn't a determinism.
Well, but then we get into things like in the middle, right, where we're talking about entities being parts of other entities or not being parts of other entities, where, like, you sort of have to have some sort of, like, sub-differentiation for them to both be and not be parts of each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, if you start expanding out the possibilities of where those lines are, you start losing the sense in which they are different entities, you know? And, like, in the middle level that you're talking about, right, you do want to be able to differentiate, right? Like, at this level, we're differentiating us as different people,
Mm-hmm.
even if hypothetically we could be the same entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you need to be able to, like, still be like, there is differentiation at certain levels, right?
Yeah.
And when you do the move to move out into the, like, well, in the probability space, it's like, okay, that's just expanding the universe. Like, the probability space isn't different from the universe, right? They're kind of the same thing. And it's sort of just like moving the scale of, like, where you're talking about in the universe, you know?
Yeah, I mean, in the way that Seth says, I'm using the term framework too, just to, like, distinguish what we're talking about here.
Right.
Like, I think he's doing the same thing with entities and all these other identities. And I think it is literally just a matter of convenience. We need a way to differentiate. It's a matter of, we're choosing experience by the way we, define borders between things. Like, that's what defines our experience as humans, that we think of ourselves as separate things. But at some level, it's kind of arbitrary. Like,
well, no, I don't think it's arbitrary, right?
Maybe that's the wrong word.
It's distinctly non-arbitrary because there's a purpose to it.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say something else, but I forgot. Getting deep here.
Right. Metaphysics.
Yeah. Got anything more on this chapter?
Well, I do think we should tell the listener how Rob managed to resolve the pseudo stroke.
Oh, yeah.
With the light visual thing, he basically gave himself the suggestion that he'll come out of it, and that ended up working for him.
Yeah, I can read where it says,
Sure.
In parentheticals, Rob writes, Seth suspended dictation in his book at my request, but during a brief interlude suggested that I have Jane turn on the rest of the lights in her room when she came out of trance. Then I was to imagine my consciousness growing brighter and brighter, filling the room like a light. I would find that all of my abilities would soon return. I wasn't able to remember some subsequent information. And I guess that's what he did.
Yeah.
He starts to be able to spell properly and transcribe it effectively afterwards.
He gave a lot of examples of his humorous spellings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was wondering about the spellings too. If, like, because, like, the way he was spelling words was sort of interesting to me. If you can, like, see it as sort of him tapping into, like, earlier, like, lives that he lived, you know?
Well, that's interesting to say that, because it's not quite exactly what you're getting into, but he also, or Seth says this, now you also drew upon some knowledge, Joseph, from past experience in our demonstration when in your final illness, motor function was impaired. This was in Denmark.
Yeah.
So he's saying that, like, getting back to maybe the dementia or the stroke that we're kind of joking around about, that, like, he's drawing from that experience in this Deming experience. And I wish he expanded a little bit more, because Rob was never really alarmed about his experience here. And I wonder if that was part of what he was drawing on, that he went through that death final illness experience and realized it wasn't as scary as he thought. His consciousness didn't get extinguished, and therefore he was relatively not worried about it. I don't know.
I sort of just chalked it up to the fact that he says he's experienced this forever, Like, I feel like if you're the type of person who has like weird episodes like this, after you've had them for decades, you probably are just like, yeah, the best course here is to just ignore it and continue on with my life, like not let it interrupt me as much as I can.
In my own experience, I trust, like that kind of deep instinct that, like, if I don't have like an emotion that this is alarming, then I kind of just brush it off. And more or less that works. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you ever have that? Or like...
No, I have the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think, I've definitely had both sides of the coin, but like a lot, even after a lot of my experience with meditation, I've been just able, but I think maybe more so with coming across Seth and moving into these beliefs that the universe is a safe place, like just having this baseline faith that things are going to be okay. Like a bad thing can happen to me and I can notice where there used to be a feeling of alarm or anxiety that's no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really powerful because it feels like you're free of something. Like these calamities of life become like challenges, and they can become, more like a fun challenge than like something you have to like really work at,
No, I agree. I think it's the right attitude to approach life with, for sure.
Yeah. And so much of that stuff, is just like, oh, I can see how that's the right attitude. It's like getting into that space is a whole nother question. You can't just like make yourself do it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably what also helped is Rob's trust in Seth.
Yeah.
Because they looked to Seth for a lot of advice, and so Rob might have just been like, oh, Seth is here. If something terrible were happening, he would certainly say something.
Right.
Yeah, and this is session 534. They're used to having just a certain level of weird experiences like this. Like, I'm sure there's dozens of them.
Right.
By this point, that flooding of Elmira already happened, right? And the bridge washed out?
I don't remember when exactly that was.
What is this?
Oh, okay. If you don't know about it, then it hasn't happened yet. There was some storm, some natural disaster that happened to Elmira, and
Where they lived.
where they survived. But it was like pretty scary at a certain point where they weren't sure if they would, but they tapped into Jane's entity, and
Like, they lived on the second level of a house, and the first level got flooded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
They were told to evacuate, and they chose not to.
Wow. Spooky.
So there's more fun parentheticals to come.
I'm excited. Rob writes them good.
Yeah.
Just wait till you get to Unknown Reality.
All I'm saying is I started reading the Jane Roberts like fiction book, and I feel like I like the writing style of the Rob parentheticals more than I like Jane's fiction.
Really?
Yeah. Like I feel like his voice is a little stronger.
I think he lends, what I get from Rob's parentheticals is like, I just feel like it's genuine.
Mm.
There's no one behind here like pretending to be this character. This is who he is. And that to me just adds legitimacy to, whatever reluctance or misgivings I had when I first got into this. Like the Rob writings, the parentheticals are a part of it, just to assuage that. Do we need to get anything else out of this?
So when he does the like light thing, is that essentially him sort of like blowing the balloon back up, of like putting the consciousness back into like this experience?
Turning the lights on?
Yeah.
I think it is, but I think that like it's the best way for Seth to guide him on a natural ability he has but doesn't know how to control.
Mm.
Like you can tell a kid, just pedal, it's easy. But if you tell him like, okay, stomp down with your left foot and then stomp down with your right foot, then they inevitably are led to do the right thing.
Right.
But Seth can't just be like, oh, just bring your consciousness back, dude. Like, you're an entity. Come on, figure it out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like not really a placebo, but it's like a guided. He's just like leading Robin into doing it, right?
Yeah, it's
That's
like
my impression.
a visualization for him to sort of like attach to, oh, well, my consciousness is like light, and so I'll imagine the room filling up with my consciousness, which is light. Yeah.
I think it's both symbolic in that way, and it's like physical, in the way like if you need to wake someone up, you might throw a bucket of water on their face. And it's that intense physical sensation that like brings you back to that consciousness that's associated with the body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also, speaking of the symbolic, that's how Seth explained Jane's experience of the painting smiling at her. That was just the way her Jane mind interpreted the Joseph entity reassuring her that this is all going to be okay. That's what Seth says.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah.
That the entity could go into the painting and change the painting, right?
Well, I think it was more her at the entity level, getting that message from him at the entity level, and then interpreting through like her framework that makes sense to her.
Got you.
Changes everything I ever knew about Scooby-Doo. You know?
Right.
'Cause they always have the eyes moving in the painting.
Oh my god, that's so true. So much weird stuff happens that they just never explain. It's like, how did this weird dude in a mask pull that off?
Is that a wrap? You got anything else on this one?
I didn't.
That's part 1 of the book. So it's kind of exciting to have a little bit of closure there. I think we took it in a deep place today, but I think the material itself is going to get quite a bit deeper.
Oh, yeah.
This time.
Once we start talking about chapter 9, I think it's going to get deep.
Yeah. It'll be fun. That's our show, but fear not, the never-ending conversation continues next week. If you're enjoying the show, please be so kind as to subscribe, like, rate, and review, and if you're feeling frisky, tell a friend. Contact us at implicatingthereal@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/implicatingthereal. We are doing our best, but whatever support you can lend helps us appreciably. We are not affiliated with the publishers or proprietors, but we encourage you to get the books. You can follow along as we endeavor to dive deep into the Sethian worldview, and there's really nothing like cultivating your own relationship with the material. Until next week, we wish you a fond good evening.